Welcome to the Jedi Chronicles series. The host today is Master Yao, founder of the Grand Trine system. He is a Tantra extraordinaire and accomplished in several natural life systems. After completion of the Marmor Project in 1997, he was raised to the rank of Master. He was later inducted into the International Circle of Masters. Master Yao is the author of 6 published books and many private select manuscripts. I've known Master Yao for 2 years now, and in that time he has helped me become the best version of myself possible. And I hope you really enjoy this series.
Good morning. We're back again. Episode number 2, The Chronicles of Master Yao. Well, what are we going to talk about this morning? This morning we're going to continue what we left off with last time, and we're going to be talking about my journey after I left college, started a corporate job, and began to find out that the world I discovered in New York City was not exactly what I was told it was. It wasn't what it seemed like on the surface, and I began this mystical journey into trying to discover a way to expand myself, I guess, to be something more than what I was, to find some direction. There were a lot of things. And I guess when I contacted some of my mentors, some of my older, wiser fellows, the first thing that they said was, you have to kind of like make you a compass. You have to devise a map. They didn't mean go and get a map of the United States or a map of New York, no. And they didn't mean go and find a compass, that you buy that's, heading toward the North Pole and all this kind of stuff, no. They were basically saying that if you want to get from here to there, you need to have like a compass or a way of seeing things the way that they really were and making better decisions. And the map that they were talking about is a map of human society, being able to see people and to understand what's going on with people in an unusual type of a way. It's like, I took a course in one of my first corporate jobs called Analytical Interpersonal Skills. And it was pretty interesting stuff. But what they were talking about was quite a step above that. They were basically saying, it's like having radar. It's like being able to see stuff people are trying to hide, being able to tell things that the normal person can't tell about people and situations and whatever. If you've ever seen that movie, The Matrix, it's kind of like that. They were basically saying, look, you got to make yourself a compass. You've got to come up with this decoder device, so to speak, that allows you to see stuff that other people can't see until you learn how to do this instinctively. So, I'm a country boy. I don't really know too much about reading people and this kind of thing like that. And so, I began to make my compass. Now, you say to yourself, Smitty Smith, what the heck are you talking about? I know it sounds really weird, but it is possible to do it, and I did do it. And I'm going to talk about that today. I'm going to talk about how you can make your compass. And so, that was like, when I was in my early 20s, so that was more than 30 years ago. And 30-some years later, I'm still working on it. It's pretty sophisticated now. So you make compasses for a lot of different things. In other words, you make one for money, so you know how to plan your money life. You make one for relationships. That's probably the most important compass you're going to make. So that's the one we're going to talk about today. And you make one for like religion, because that's pretty important. You can make one for dealing with your family, your career. It's up to you. But there's 2 or 3 of them pretty much everybody's going to need. And let's try to get you an idea of what we're talking about here. So this compass doesn't point to the North Pole, no. It's pointing to your goal. It's pointing to your original self, and it's kind of basically saying, if you go in this direction, not going to take you home. If you go in that direction, it's going to bring you closer to your objective. That's kind of what we're talking about. So in the relationship compass, part of its function is to show us how to read women. And to a lesser extent, to show us how to read men. And we assume that the face, the facade that people are showing you is half false, half true. It's blocking, you know, we talked about looking up under the ocean, looking up under that lake, you know, it's like, we look at the world out here and we're seeing, yeah. This is what all the signs in front of the store are saying. They don't tell you what's on the fine print of the contract and why they're going to come, you know, what happens if they repossess the goods. The world is like, you know, showing you all this stuff, and underneath that is a whole hidden agenda. So the woman is all dressed up looking nice, and you approach her and the 2 of you chat and this, that, and the other. She's got her agenda, you've got your agenda. They're not the same thing. So I want to be able to see beneath the facade. I want to be able to see what's going on with her, you know, in there. I want to understand what I'm dealing with. So it's not the North Pole that the compass is pointing to. It's your natal self, your original self, the me that I want to one day be. And I started out reading books. That's what they told me. So I started out with about 6 or 7 books to read. I read all the books that they told me to read. Weren't that helpful. It wasn't that helpful. The truth of the matter is that the books that I needed to read, some of them weren't in English yet. Some of them, I wouldn't have understood had I been exposed to them at that age, in my 20s. And most of them just hadn't been written yet. I would end up writing them myself. So I read the books, didn't help much. Then the next thing that I did was I began to create a directory of people. When I first did it, I understood that it wasn't going to be what I needed. It wasn't going to be a real compass. It was going to be like a trial run of a compass. In other words, it was going to be like, you're going to carve a piece of wood and you want to make a horse. And so the first time you carve it, you're just trying to get it in the general shape of a horse. And that's all. You're not trying to get the facial features right. You're not trying to get the legs exactly the right proportions. You're not trying to show musculature. You're just trying to get a rough idea of something with 4 legs, a head, the body, right? And that's what I was doing. I knew that it wasn't going to be a complete, real compass, but I had to start someplace, and so that's what I did. I made a directory of people, which ones to avoid, which ones to follow, which ones would be helpful, which ones you want to kind of come in contact with. And a lot of this was geared to females, because this was a relationship compass. So I put down just like a paragraph talking about describing the females that were the most important to me and the most beneficial and the most attractive to me. In other words, when I first saw her, she was a 7. And then when I got to know her, she moved up to a 9. You see what I'm saying? And why did I not rate her a 9 in the beginning? All right? And so I just went by a lot of women, including platonic relationships, including women that I was related to and just friends with and whatever, and just made a directory of women, okay, to start with. But I didn't have a system for being able to categorize these women, all right? I just had a directory, that's all. But that's how I started. Then I started looking at ways that I could make me a real compass using this directory. And this is taking place over months. And I'm talking to people and I'm researching this thing and whatever. So we're going to skip 2 or 3 years. And I'm basically just going to tell you the outcome of what happened when I actually had my compass. So, you know, the Jedi, the evolved human, is trying to be something extraordinary, superior. He doesn't want to be mediocre. He wants to get away from this whole juvenile way of living. We don't want to live paycheck to paycheck. We don't want to go from just this girlfriend to that girlfriend to this girlfriend. And then when we, at the end of the relationship, we feel like we got cheated, we didn't get enough, we didn't get the essence of that person, we didn't have all the good times and the good fun. We're trying to avoid that. We're trying to say, look, if we're going to be a Jedi, we can't be distracted with not having any money. We can't be distracted with a lot of drama, a lot of female drama, and you know, that kind of stuff, and broken hearts and all this other kind of, you know, that's how you're going to be a superhero if you're really wallowing in that kind of juvenile type of activity. No. So we needed a compass, and the directory gradually morphed into an actual compass, and here's how that happened. So I started looking at what makes us original human beings. In other words, what are the attributes that we need to really keep our eye on if we're going to be able to tell how to predict relationship outcomes. So if we're going to have some kind of a compass that's going to show us, deal with this woman, don't deal with that woman. Why? What are you going to get from this woman? What are you going to get from that woman? And so one of the first things that came up was language. Now, I'm not talking about English and French and Chinese. That's not the kind of language I'm talking about. I'm talking about the language that we were talking at the time. Of course, we were using English. But in that period of time, we were talking about a lot of stuff that was technically oriented, job oriented, and current event oriented, and that's it. We were not talking about life. When I had conversations with women, they always seemed to get steered into this pit that of safe, non-informing subject matter. In other words, people are talking, you're not learning anything from it. It's safe. It's like, okay, we're having a great conversation, but we're making a real serious effort not to say anything important or not to talk about anything important. So this whole language thing, you know, I realized, well, the common woman, the common man, myself included, needs to expand their vocabulary. Why? Well, first of all, you need to expand your vocabulary and start talking about nature, natural things, life systems, things that are involved in the spiritual ecology, the things that define how humans are and our being. And we weren't talking about these things. We didn't even have the vocabulary for it. And the reason this is important is because your mind can only shape conceptions based on one of two things, words or images. It's either images or words, that's it. Unless you're getting inspiration from outside someplace, which is possible. But basically, if you don't have a vocabulary, and you're not regularly using it, then the mind tends not to shape the concepts associated with those words. And this is true when you're talking to females, and this is true when you're trying to determine what is really going on inside the essence of that female. So the most important thing, at least in the beginning, in me understanding how to navigate with women was language. And you know, I dealt with the players and the this and the that. I dealt with the nerds to see how they approached it. I looked at different people, and what I came up with was, you know, I needed to expand my vocabulary to deal with words that define the experience of women and the experience of man. Things that were uncommon, and things that talk about how we naturally really are. So words like, word terms like womb imprint, the blood tree, astral realm, what's a deity, heart chords, things like that, that define experiences that men and women have, but regular people in that society had no knowledge of those words, what they were talking about. So I had to make myself familiar with them, and I found that in the first 2 or 3 weeks of an encounter with a female, I needed to make her familiar with them without coming right out and telling her this. I had to expand her vocabulary, because if she was going to be able to converse with me and move away from the normal conversation that was pretty much empty, I needed to expand my vocabulary, I needed to expand her vocabulary, okay? Language. You know, if you don't have language, you limit the concepts your mind can hold. And I didn't want to be limited. Now, you know, just a little clue. It's a lot easier to do today, because you've got these books, you know, The Oracle of Kemp's a new book. And that book contains a bunch of words you haven't heard used the way that they're used in here. They're used in here the way they used to be used 100 years ago, 800 years ago, 1,000 years ago in indigenous cultures. So this book is giving you that vocabulary that allows you to communicate with women on a very expanded plane. Another book that does that is this one here, Awakening the Master Masculine. Now if you read this, it happens very subtly. You don't realize you're being re-educated. But this has a vocabulary in it of all of those natural terms that people use in relationships. And so that, you know, you start to speak in a different way when you're talking to the opposite sex. And then as a consequence of that, they start responding to you differently in an expanded way. You got to do it to understand it. You'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, the next thing I came across was the personality. And so, same thing. When you're, when I'm dealing with people's personality, at first I thought there was no framework, there was no system, there was no category, or there was no way that you could, you know, define personality. But I was wrong. And I found that indigenous cultures had been defining personalities for centuries, but they were not uniform. Now, Western society had attempted to define personality, but they were pretty new at the game, and they were pretty pitiful in their attempts to try to do that. They talked about the ego and the id and the this and the that, and really a lot of it was just guessing kind of in the dark. Whereas the old world cultures had this thing down to a science. And so I took a lot of the old world knowledge and I distilled it down into a system that I called the Counterfeit personality system. It's really what we talk about as being abnormal psychology. And so, you know, I wrote a book about it and I included that into another book, but that's later on. At the time, all I could see was that there were categories that things fit into, that people had a pattern of personality, and it fit molds, it fit predictable definitions. So what we talk about is we talk about how your personality gets away from your original character, your original persona. So you're born with a persona in your DNA. The result of, you know, your generations, your great-great-great-grand, and your great-great-grand, and your grand, and your, you know, your mother and your father, they all changed their DNA in each lifetime. And then they handed you this DNA, you know, boom. Then you're born and you get this, the summation of all the changes that have been made to the DNA before you. And you get this lifetime. You get these parents raise you. They're going to be rich or they're going to be poor. You're going to be in Michigan or you're going to be in South Carolina. And you get all of these things that shape you. And then, you know, you're going to have brothers and sisters, and you're going to have a culture, a religion. All these things shape you. So by the time you're a teenager, you're no longer what you were born. You have a new type of a personality. And that personality is not based on you. It's based on the environment and all these factors we just talked about. And it's exceptionally dysfunctional. It's counterfeit. In other words, it's not really you, but it's who you think you are as a result of your experiences. And so the indigenous cultures talked about it so much, and they gave all kinds of information about it. And I, you know, went through all of that and came up with a system. So there are 5 types of what we call alternate personalities or counterfeit personalities. In other words, you're either your original self that you were born to be, or you're one of these 5 counterfeit substitutes. So we call them schizoids, oral, psychopathic, masochistic, or anal. Those are the 5 types, okay? Or veer away from the original persona, or an original way of looking at humanity or looking at a person in society. So the schizoid, the first one we talk about, it's a system of masking. In other words, you're kind of like hiding. You don't want people to see you. It's a coping mechanism, okay? And this coping behavior, the way that they do it is isolation. So they're isolating themselves. And when you see this personality, this persona, it's a split persona. It's at first they're full, it's all of them, and then for another period of time, they're part of them. They're holding back a part of them. They're only showing you a particular side. So it's a split personality, all right? It's rotating between partial expression to full expression. Boom, 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 boom. And they're introverted, normally. They're conservative. They dress conservatively. And their main way that you can tell them is their intellect. They intellectualize. Even if they're not that smart, even if they're not that intellectually, they still try to intellectualize everything. You know, that's their first go-to thing. And so by intellectualizing in their conversation, dress, and everything, they're in effect disguising the real them, so you can't see, because they're masking, right? And so it's like this screen in front of them that they show you, and you're looking at that, and they're hiding over here, so you can't see them. That's the schizoid. The second type is a very common type that I came in contact with a lot. It's called the oral personality type. And oral is talking about dependency instead of masking. So in the dependency theme, what you see is that the person appears clingy, needy, dependent on you, but they're really not. It's a way of pulling you in. It's another way of getting away from what's really there. So they have this desire for things that's exaggerated. In other words, they believe that they need stuff more than they do. They consume stuff more than they need to. Money and sex are two things. It's like they're always trying to be in love, whether they're truly feeling love or not. It's like they got to be in love all the time. They got to be in a relationship all the time. They worry about things for the wrong reasons. In other words, they'll be like, I'm always afraid I'm going to lose my job. But there's really not much of a chance of that. Okay? And so they got this compulsive thing going on with that. They fear abandonment, and that's where all this comes from. When they were young, they were abandoned. And so there's this existential fear that no matter what, I'm going to get abandoned again. Even if there's no signs of that coming. They have this internal fear of abandonment, and that causes them to feel a sense of entitlement. So it's like, okay, because I was abandoned and because I'm going to be abandoned in the future, I'm entitled to more stuff, more money, more sex right now from you, and you need to give that, okay? They're very afraid of attractive partners, and they self-sabotage themselves. A good example of this it would be the character Donkey on Shrek. He was an oral personality structure. Okay. Next one is the psychopathic. And the psychopathic is basically dealing with control. It's like the one thing overriding everything in their life is they need to stay in control of everything. They need to be in control of their grades. They need to be in control of all their friends. They need to be in control of the game. If you're playing baseball, they need to be in control. They need to make the rules. They need to be the ones controlling what is said in the conversation. They're trying to dominate the conversation. If you're trying to decide where to go to eat, they're the ones who want to make the decision. They need to be in control all the time, especially in intimate relationships. They are not able to separate their need for control from their need for social intimacy. They just can't do it. When a person that they're trying to relate to is not controllable, then they won't relate to them, no matter how attracted to them that they are. So normally when you see psychopathic people, they're dealing with a member of the opposite sex, a little bit lower on the scale than probably what you would think that they could attract. So you'd be like, you know, wow, what's this person doing with that person? You're like, okay, they could probably do better, but they don't want to do better because they want to remain in control, okay? They want to be right. They tend to be aggressive and domineering. And they typically limit themselves because a lot of people don't want to be around a person like that. And so they tend to be forced to be around a lot of people who will accept them and their domineering, tyrannical ways. They've learned, and it's a coping mechanism, but again, that's their operating mode, that's their motive of operation, is control. The masochistic is very different from that. The masochistic is a motif of being passive and aggressive at the same time. In other words, they're indirectly aggressive. They're not openly aggressive. They don't go straight toward their goals. They are passive aggressive, and they avoid risk. They are people who have figured out all of these indirect, covert means of getting what they want, and that's their whole life is about. They feel trapped. They feel unworthy. They feel unvalidated, and so they're always scheming behind the scenes, underneath the surface, to get validation, to feel needed, to feel worthy to be praised, okay? And sexually, they find it very difficult to directly ask for what they want, or even to present themselves in a way that they'll get it. They always want to get their sexual needs filled indirectly. And this presents some serious problems for them. They're almost the opposite of the psychopathic types. And a lot of times you'll see psychopathics and masochistics trying to be in a relationship together, but that's pretty explosive, pretty dramatic, and it usually has a lot of fireworks. Sometimes it might work, usually no. The last type is called the anal type, the rigid type, and that's their mode of operation. They rigidly stick to their guns and they don't want to bend, negotiate, anything like that. Of course, the psychopathic doesn't want to negotiate even more. But the anal, the reason they don't want to negotiate is different. Because they're into winning, period. It starts out with them, the reason that they're rigid is because they suppress emotions. They feel like emotions are bad. Emotions expose them. Emotions weaken them. They feel they can best navigate the world. They can best cope with the world if they can do so without emotion. So they lack patience, they lack empathy, they lack compassion. They become uncomfortable around certain situations, and that's how you can tell. At hospitals, daycare centers, funerals, ceremonies, they typically will step back to the back of the room or find an excuse to miss part of it. They don't like being around sick people because then they need to show empathy, and it's hard for them to do. Therefore, they tend to be egocentric and selfish, not for the same reasons as the other people, but more so because they are afraid of the outcome of the emotions that they need to show other people. And so they're egocentric because if they are focused on the concerns of someone else, they feel uncomfortable. And underneath all of that is a core of insecurity. Let me give you some examples of something. Like the anal person, in Godfather you had this character, Michael, the son, who later on took over the family. Michael Corleone, I think his name was. That's a good example of an anal personality structure. If you remember that movie Boomerang with Eddie Murphy, there was an actress in there, Robin Gibbons. She played this very big corporate vice president or whatever. She would be an example of a masochistic woman. Psychopathic, controlling, that would be like Ike Turner type of a character. In the Ike and Tina movie, Ike Turner would be psychopathic. Oral, I said Donkey from Shrek, and there's a lot of other good examples of the oral we'll get to later. So, the main issue for each one, schizoid, split personality. Oral, entitlement issues, abandonment issues. Psychopathic, control need. Masochistic, passive aggressive. Anal, materialistic, suppresses emotions. When you look at each one, they all have this compulsion, this compelling drive. Schizoid, they are compelled to criticize. If you watch them in conversations, they sit there like vultures, waiting for somebody to say something wrong, do something wrong, or show some lack of intelligence, and immediately they pounce. And they'll make a very nice, socially okay, politically correct criticism in the most condescending but acceptable way that they can. They'll be like, your glasses are too, they don't have the right magnification. Are you aware of that? And you're sitting there, you've been using your glasses for like 3 years, they're fine for you. And I know you probably think they're okay, but you could do, if you changed it this way, you would get a better, it'd be easier on your eyes, or something like that. This book, it's too thin, it needs to be thicker. Your table isn't the right kind of wood. It would be better if it was ebony or something, or this, that, or the other. So, you don't get the sense that they're trying to hurt you with that. It's almost that they need to do that in order to communicate with you. And it gives them a feeling of being equal to you because they're basically putting you down in order for them to come up equal to you. So they have to criticize. It's almost like in order for them to stay masked, they have to keep you distracted with criticism. The oral, same thing, they're always consuming. The psychopathic, they're always trying to stay in control. The masochistic, they're always interfering because they can't directly challenge you, so they just interfere. Anal, they always have to win, even when it's not important, even when it's really distracts from the whole idea of what we're trying to do here. There's no competition. We're not trying to compete with each other, but still, they got to interject competition into it so that they can win. The same way that the schizoid has to intellectualize things and has to show superiority, has to criticize. To get to the same result, the anal has to win, so that they juxtapose a barrier between you and them. So the criticism is interjecting a barrier between you and them. The winning is saying, I'm winning, you're not, and it's putting a barrier between you and them. All of these personality structures are facades, barriers, to make a difference, to differentiate between what they would do in their natural environment, if they were their natural self, and what they're doing in this world to cope. Okay, so what is all this about? All this is saying that we create this structure, this system of categories, labels, and definitions, so that we have a way of constructing our compass. So basically the compass is saying, if we see A, do B, do 4. If we see D, do 8. If we see F, do 16. You see what I'm saying? So your compass is basically saying, we want to know what to do when we meet a particular woman. So then I, had this directory of women, 20, 30 of the most important women in my life, platonic or non-platonic, all of my relationships, everything back as far as I could remember, even, my mom, and what I was doing when I was 2 years old, my aunts and all this, that, and the other. And so I went back now, after I came up with this system, and I decided which personality type, counterfeit personality type, fit which women. So I started assigning women. I did one per week. Put a lot of thought into it, because this is your compass. You're going to base decisions for the rest of your life on this compass. So I started assigning women to these categories: masochistic, anal, schizoid. And when I had examples of all 5, my compass was made, right? So then I started storing information into my compass. So once you get 2 women who are oral, you're good. You now have a way of predicting what an oral woman is going to do, because you've seen them do it. Well, first of all, you know what they're going to do based on the definition of what oral is. But you take it further than that, and you make it personal for you. So now you're writing down, in just a paragraph, what an oral woman did in your last encounter with her. If you had a relationship, what did the oral women do? What did those 2 oral women do in that relationship? Good and bad. If you had an anal woman who was your boss, what did she do in that situation? Good and bad. And now you've got 10 women who have defined these categories for you based on their actions, what actually happened, and you have a compass, at least the beginning of it. You have the skeleton of the compass. So now, the next time you meet a woman and she's oral, and you're thinking about inviting her out, before you go out, you read what's in your compass, the notes you put down about the oral woman, and you keep that in your mind. And then while you're out with her, you're observing if she's acting oral or not, which they always do, and what else you can pick up about her that you need to take note of, because that's going to determine how you function in the future. In other words, if you know you just aren't going to get along with oral women, the sooner you know that the woman is oral and you're not going to get along with her, the better. Because why waste your time? If you're not going to be in a relationship with an anal woman, and you know this, then you need to be able to pick anal women as soon as you can. And so you start wasting your time. And what I determined was there was a couple of personality types. They were fine for friends. I could work with them. Okay? They were good for other things, but a relationship, no. Right? And then there were situations where there were some women who were very attractive to me, but there were certain things, experiences, activities, or subjects that we needed to avoid. Just hypothetically, me and masochistic women should not discuss X, Y, and Z. We shouldn't do this type of activity. It didn't end well. And so if we could avoid that, things would go better. Let's don't try to deal with this until 3 or 4 months into the relationship. So you begin to develop this compass where you start to see how to conduct your relationships based on this system of understanding basically, I am not my original self anymore because all of these experiences that I've had. I have this counterfeit personality structure, which is a hindrance. And recognizing that, now the next thing, I want to know what counterfeit personality structure all of these women have, so that I know what I can do, what I can't do, what to avoid, what not to avoid, which direction to go in. And I had made me a compass. Now, in the years that came, after I turned 25, I started refining my compass every year. Sometimes I forgot about it for months at a time because things were going so good. And then something major would happen and I would be like, oh, okay, let's not just limit the compass to the personality structure. Let's add some more things to the compass, right? And so then I started adding categories of vocabulary. And I started looking at genetics. What were their parents and grandparents like? How did that affect the personality structure? I started crossing stuff. I started looking at a bunch of stuff. And what I started to notice was that whenever I started a relationship, I was not relating to the woman. I was relating to her avatar, her surrogate. That's what the counterfeit personality was. That was the real woman, where she was born to be, and they had a facade in front of that. So you could not get straight to the real woman that was in here, in there. They had a big old force field up, preventing you from getting there. They didn't even want you to see that. And that's how all people are, men and women. And so what I wanted to do was immediately pierce, like have Superman X-ray vision. I wanted to pierce right through that and see right to what's really going on. And so I needed certain critical things in my compass to allow me to do that. And so I recognized after a while that you never see the real person right off the bat. Half of them don't even know what they are underneath. You're always seeing the surrogate. Like in that movie Avatar, you had the person, then you had the avatar, which basically, acts and it's like a body. It's like an avatar. So you see the avatar because they're doing the action out in the world, but you don't see the people in the little capsule hidden over there, protected, and you don't see what they really look like, what's really motivating them. You don't know where they really came from, what their history is, all of that. So the compass that I made for myself started showing me these things. And I began to understand when I met people, I was meeting an avatar of them, a visual image of them that was not the original, that was not really them, that did not reflect what was in their heart, what they grew up to be, the essence of them. And after a while, in 20 minutes, I could tell the difference between the person that I was talking to and the person behind that, the real person. 20 minutes. Sometimes now I can do it in 10 because guess what? If you've seen 10 masochistic women and you've had encounters with 10 masochistic women and you follow that up with activities, action, and some history, you spent 2 weeks with this one, 2 months with that one, you had six meetings with this one, you did joint projects with that one there, it starts to build up a catalog in your mind of every possible way that a masochistic woman is going to react to all these different types of events. How is she going to react sexually? How is she going to react in terms of financial? If we go out on a date, who pays? How is she going to react in terms of dress? If we go to this type of club, how does she typically dress? If she goes to a sporting event, how does she typically, is she going to cheer, whatever. And so of course that's individuality. But once you start looking at 20 masochistic women, you start to see, without question, with 100% accuracy, that there's limits to what they will do, limits to what they won't do. And you start to know what those limits are. And now you've got a compass that is infallible. You can have mistakes in relationships to some extent, but they're limited. In other words, you have control of it. You know how far you're going to make a mistake. You know, you can say, well, I want to take a chance to see how she's going to react once we get to this point. But you know you're going to get to that point. And then you know that it's going to bring up this dilemma. You don't know how she's going to react past that point, but you know you're going to get to that point. And when you do, here's what she's going to be thinking, and here's what her options are going to be. And so the compass is exceptionally accurate. And when you look at these 5 types, they all have a mode of operation. They all have a way that they are. And outside of that, there's very little variation. Of course, the oral is very, very different from the schizoid. And the masochistic is very, very different than the anal. Very, very different. In some cases, they're almost the opposite of each other. But all anal women have just certain things in common. All masochistic women have certain things in common. And therefore, your compass becomes very, very, very useful. And my compass now has become exceptionally accurate and exceptionally useful, to more than I ever thought it could be. And so in all life events, what you discover is that you're in a race. You just don't know you are. You're racing the joint counterfeit personality structures. The counterfeit personality structures, based on their definitions, are always trying to undermine what people do. Always. That's what they do. The NATO persona, your real you, is always trying to accomplish stuff. But the counterfeit personality structure, that facade in the front of you, is always trying to undermine stuff, always trying to destroy stuff, always trying to disconnect people. So you're always in a race. If you're trying to get this emotional sexual connection with this woman before your counterfeit personality and her counterfeit personality pushes you apart. You're trying to do this project with your buddies. You put this money together, you started this business. You're trying to make a revenue and get a history going before the counterfeit personality of the group splits you apart. Everything that you're trying to do, whether it's with children, elderly, whatever, you're fighting against the counterfeit personality matrix that's always trying to push people apart to get your objective accomplished before the counterfeit personality can do that. And so you're always in this race. And the men who can see this matrix underneath life, this counterfeit personality matrix upon which life is built, when they can see that, you know, like Neo in the Matrix, they tend to be more successful because they know, I gotta push, I gotta step it up. Because if I don't, 2 months from now, the way things are going, her counterfeit personality is gonna take her out of this relationship. If I don't get to this point, you know, if I don't get to this stage, by then, the relationship is done. If I can get to this stage, then there's enough of a connection between us, we're gonna get past the problems the counterfeit personality is gonna present. Okay? It's like, that's the race that we're all in. But just most of us don't know we're in that race. The Jedi knows. The Jedi knows. All right. So, once you get this compass constructed, and you go back and you look at your original sexual program, and what we find is that, you know, your sexual program and your relationship program is already coded into your DNA, right? You don't have to develop one, it's already there. What you have to do is activate it. So most people try to, come up with game after they become an adult from making mistakes. That's the wrong way to do it. You activate what's already in your DNA, and then you learn how to perfect that, what's activated. And that's based on who you are, natally. The science of unlocking these genes, these sexual genes, so that you can activate your sexual program, your relationship program. That's called Tantra. And the art of Tantra is the art of using these attributes, traits, things that you woke up in healing, bliss, and in relationship, and in solving relationship conflict. So Tantra is waking up the sexual DNA, and Tantra is how you finesse, how do you do it. Now, in modern societies and old world societies, Tantra was forbidden, and to some extent still is. I mean, mainly through religion, they suppressed and they basically just they undermined Tantra and sabotaged it whenever they could. When the religions became strong enough, it was just illegal. And in fact, the penalty for knowing about Tantra was death in some places at certain times. The reason is this, because when people were very attractive and people had great sexual power and charisma, and they tended to do bad things. Women tended to not be faithful. There tended to be a lot of fornication, or whatever you want to call it, or promiscuity. Men tend to become possessive. There was rape. There was all kinds of, the passion of sex drove people to do a lot of selfish, bad things. And so the reaction of the masses in most cultures in olden times was just to suppress that stuff. Let's just suppress it, stop it, and you can have a little sex over here once you get married, but out in general society, we don't want to see any sex. We don't want to see you dressing sexy. We don't want to see you looking at women a certain way. We don't want to hear you talking about it, because only it's gonna move you to do a lot of bad, passionate things. And this became the prevailing way of looking at sex. They didn't want to talk about it. They just, because they couldn't control the emotions and the things that came from it. Why? Because they didn't know Tantra. They had forgotten it. And they didn't know how to control this sexual beast when it reared its ugly head. And their solution was just stop it. Let's don't even talk about it. Let's act like it's not there. And of course, that just made the problem worse. Forbidden fruit. The whole story of Eve in the Garden of Eden. And so you call yourself solving the sexual problem by suppressing it, and you just made it worse. And so we forgot that the solutions to all of these things are inside of you. You just need to learn to wake them up. But the people who knew how to do that, the ancient masters and whatever, were killed or driven off or, driven out of society, to the point where eventually all of this stuff was forgotten. And when we look at the natural level of sexual function in a human being, it's not normal. In other words, the normal way that people are having sex today is way below what they're naturally capable of. So what we consider to be normal is really, 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 really way down below normal. Normal, what's natural, is when we start to see it today, it appears supernatural, because people are capable of full body orgasms. They're capable of 2 hours of orgasms. They're capable of sex that lasts, 2 or 3 hours. They're capable of all types of what you would consider supernatural events, expansion of consciousness, healing of all types of different types of diseases and illnesses and conditions through the sexual energy. So all of these things, is like, no, you can't. Well, yeah, you can. And, scientists calls this expanded sexual response, ESR. And what I proved, almost 20 years ago was that ESR is the natural way we're supposed to be. It's not an extraordinary thing. It's not abnormal at all. That's where every human being is supposed to be. But you got to wake up the DNA to get there. And we had, human society has forgotten how to do this. We've been trying to teach them how to do it again. And that's the purpose of Grand Trine. But that's another thing about this whole thing about this compass. Because you're going to find out that, well, because men and women, and we're talking about women today, don't have the sexual game on point, and because their sexual game is so retarded, so primitive, so juvenile, that they're not going to behave in relationships the way they naturally normally would. So you got this compass thing showing us these counterfeit personality structures, and they are predicting how the woman is going to respond in relationships. But then you have to add an addendum, you have to make a change, you have to tweak it to talk about how they're going to react because their sex game is retarded, it's juvenile. We don't mean this in a, that's not a slur, we're not trying to, we're not trying to put a black mark on women or men. Because 98% of the world, 98% of the people in the world are at this retarded level. And maybe 50 years from now, when all of this science becomes more widespread, people will elevate back up to something closer to normal. Maybe, maybe not. We hope that's the case. But you have to change the way you operate your compass to take this sexual thing into consideration. You got to take into consideration, if people's sex thing was okay, they would act basically exactly the way we're predicting in the counterfeit personality discussion. But because of the sexual thing, they're not. So, we take another look at that. We go back and we take another look at that. We take another look at the Jedi compass and we say, okay, well, what do we do when we take this whole sex thing into the game, and a few other little things we have to take into the game. The Jedi always has a compass. The Jedi always has a map for life. And basically what you're saying is, that's his source of intel. You won't always get covert intelligence before you go parachuting behind enemy lines. The evolved man, the Jedi, does not seek to learn from his mistakes. He seeks not to make them in the first place. The regular alpha male, he's like a bull in a china shop. He's plunging ahead and he's just like, okay, we're just going to do this. If we make mistakes, we'll learn, but we're just going to move forward. We're going to bull forward. And he doesn't understand that the typical diva, she's been planning relationships since she was 3. And so when you have this alpha male running head into the diva's always going to win. So basically what you're going to see is she's going to have his head stuffed and mounted on her trophy wall. And that's how it always goes. Men think that they win because they got some draws or something, but they didn't really win. In the long run, he always loses, unless he has a compass. So let's look at this compass, what it looks like when you add the sexual component to it. So there's 4 relationship dynamics that are going to be mitigated because you've taken this counterfeit personality piece and you've added this sexual piece and you've combined to come up with this dynamic of how you're going to look at women. So we already know we're going to look at them based on this sexual piece. We're going to determine where are they in sexual evolution. Are they at the little girl stage, the juvenile stage, or the adult women stage? And we know we're going to look at them based on, are they schizoid, anal, oral, whatever. And then there's 4 other dynamics there. And these are not, from the last 100 years. These are stuff that's happened in the last 20 years. These are current dynamics that make the system, the compass, relevant today. So the first one is that her pain, the female pain, is always greater than the male pain. Your pain. That is always the female perception. Female pain is greater, more relevant than male pain. In fact, many of them don't acknowledge male pain at all. And because her pain is greater than your pain, she feels entitled to certain advantages in the relationship. Number two, black females absorb certain behavior traits from white civilization, white culture. And these things don't serve her. So there's some things that she gets from the overall culture that can be helpful. But there's a few specific things that she gets very unhelpful. Number three, black females develop a sense of entitlement based on their view of the society and its injustice. In other words, this society has been very bad to the black race overall, okay? Economically, slavery, genocide. I mean, it's just every time you look, there's some type of tragedy that's being visited upon blacks. So the woman is saying, based on this pattern, I deserve a sense of entitlement. I deserve some consideration based on the fact that I'm a victim. Okay? But the thing about it is, she feels that the black man is absolutely not entitled to the same entitlement. He's not entitled to the same consideration that she is. He's not entitled to any sense of injustice or victimhood based on the fact that he's the primary target of all of this stuff that's happened. Black woman, yep. Black man, no. Number four, and this is the main one. Most women, black or white really, enter the relationship on a platform of independence. That's what they basically say based on the whole feminist agenda. We are equal to men. We're coming into the relationship as an independent entity, and we don't really need you, but here's what you can offer, and here's what I can offer, and we go from there. And the truth is, that is not the case at all. Not even close. The average woman, especially the average black woman, comes into the relationship agenda from a place of dependence. There's certain things that they are dependent on the man for, which they, number one, don't want to acknowledge. Number two, they come in with a predisposition to have a certain worldview that has nothing to do with the current man, but has everything to do with their past experience with parents, religions, other men, negative sexual molestations, incest, rape, all of this stuff here. They are pretending that they're independent and they're free. They're coming in as a free agent, that they're coming in to this relationship as a new being, as as able to make decisions based on what they find there. That's completely untrue. They're completely hampered and not free, not independent at all, in their ability to respond emotionally or logically to the relationship scenario as they find it, because they're completely handicapped, completely rendered illogical based on what's happened in the past and their interpretation of it. What I'm saying here is that the woman is really operating on a demerit system. In other words, if you take the average woman, the typical woman, she based her posture toward men, all men, on the 3 or 4 worst experiences she's had in her life with men. Not on the 3 or 4 best. She can have 25 years of positive experiences with 101 different men, all positive, all great. Yep, that's great. Does not shape how she looks at the 102nd man. She based her view of men on the 3 or 4 worst, maybe 5 worst experiences she ever had. That is how she's shaping her standard for men. That's how she looks at men. That's how she grades them. That's how she prepares herself to respond to them. So she does not go into the new relationship with an independent, free thought. The platform is not free. It's not independent. It's based on her previous worldview completely. And it has all types of predispositions, landmines, and opinions that are already rigidly fixed. So she is going to respond in the first month of that relationship based on her idea of how she should respond to these bad men, these 4 or 5 really bad men or bad situations that she survived. What those other good men did, the majority of the men, has nothing whatsoever to do with her posture going into a new relationship. And each of the 5 personality types, the counterfeit personality types, responds to these 4 dynamics slightly differently. They're all the same in terms of the general dynamic of how they're looking at life with men. But each one has a twist to it based on the counterfeit personality structure. And that is the final tweak that you have to do to your compass. You have to go back and look at, and you can't go back too far because it's still got to be fresh in your mind. You've got to go back and look at the last 4 or 5 women and grade them based on, okay, she's oral, and this is what she did with the first dynamic. This is what she did with the dynamic of, you have the conversation, well, this happened to me when I was 15, and this happened to you when you were 15. My pain is greater than your pain. How did the oral woman look at that? How did the schizoid woman look at that? And the same thing. So you talk about the behaviors that they get from white culture that don't serve black women because they're not black culture. And you say, well, this is really making our relationship difficult. So how did the anal woman look at that, okay, versus how the psychopathic woman look at that? And you make that calculation in your compass. Now your compass is up to date. And your compass is then even more helpful. And what you see is that if you try to go through life without a compass as a Jedi, it's hard to do. It's hard to do. It's just too much happening. The society is too complex for you to really be able to maneuver it like that. Every Jedi has to have his compass and his map, and we'll talk about the map another day. We're going to continue this conversation in future episodes. We're going to look at more specific things, like we'll just look at just the masochistic woman, or we look at just the anal woman, or we look at just the schizoid woman in certain situations. We're going to come back and visit this again. But this is like a basic thing you need to know so that you can understand future episodes. So this whole compass idea, we're going to come back and visit this compass idea again. In other words, all the things men can do so that when they come to a crisis, when they come to a crossroads, they are not helpless. That they're able to see what other men don't see. That they can perform the way other men can't perform. So that they can react the way other men can't react. And so that their success in life is dramatically increased. So that they feel as if they can conquer any situation. The Jedi never leaves home without his compass and his map. And I hope in this discussion today, in episode number 2, you've got a rough idea of how to make your compass. Because, you can. And of course, a lot of this information is in this book, Awakening the Master Masculine. I got to sell some books. That's how I live. And even more is in this book. So that, when you when you read the books, you get a better idea of how to do some of the things that we're talking about in terms of the compass. And I know it's hard to remember stuff from a video, but if it's written down, you can refer back. Of course, there's things in the video that's not in the book, and that's the way it's going to be in the Master Yao Chronicles. So my final word is, never leave home without your compass, Jedis. This is Master Yao. These chronicles will continue. Good morning.